Now I'm going to go over solving equations. So this is the back side of your review. It'll have all the solving equations problems. Okay, so now this first one, number 24. Remember, what you want to do is we want to isolate the variable, or isolate the letter. Okay, we want to get it alone on one side of this equal sign here in the middle. Okay, that's our goal. So what I like to do in this problem, since x is already on the left side, I want all the numbers out of x over here on the left side of the equal sign. And I want all the numbers that don't have x, I want them all to be over here. Okay, so we'll just say numbers. Okay, so the first thing I do before I start working on equations is I draw a line down the middle. This helps us stay organized. Okay, then I draw another line here, because what we're going to do is, again, we want all the numbers that have x over here on the left side of the equal sign, and we want all the other numbers over here. So on this side, we have two terms, and one of them is not an x term. That's the 8. So that's the term that I want to be removed. In order to remove it, I need to make it 0. To do that, I subtract it from itself, because it's a positive 8. Okay? So if I subtract it from itself, it goes away and it makes 0. But again, with equations, whatever you do on one side of an equation, you have to do the same to the other in order to keep it balanced. So I subtract 8 from this side as well. And now what I'll do here on the left is just bring down the 3x, because that's what I have left, equals, and now I have negative 13, negative 8. Well, again, like I showed you on the other side, I can use the box. 13 is negative, 8 is also negative, so that means I'm going to add them. 13 plus 8 will be 21, and it's in the negative, they're both in the negative box, so that makes it negative. Okay? And just remember, what you're doing is, again, whatever I did here, I have to do to the other side to balance it. Now, the last thing I want to do, again, is I want x by itself. X is not by itself, because there's this 3 in front of it. Okay? I want x to just look like this, x equals, but it's not. It has a 3. Okay, so in order to remove that 3, the 3 is being multiplied times x, so it's actually 3 times x. So I'll do the opposite of multiplication, which is divide. Divide the 3 away. That cancels it out, because if you think about it, 3 divided by 3 equals 1. So really it just becomes 1. And now I have x equals 21 divided by 3, which is 7. But then it's, remember, a negative on top, positive on the bottom. So a triangle here. Negative, positive, that means it'll be negative. The answer is x equals negative 7. Okay? Number 25. Again, I want to organize myself, so I draw a line. And I draw a line underneath, because we're going to be adding and subtracting. And again, remember, I always want variables on one side, or x, and then I want numbers on the other side. And in this case, I have x on both sides. I have an x term on both sides of the equation. So I'm going to choose to have my x variables on the left, and I want my numbers on the right. So if you think about it, looking at these, starting with the right side, if I want just numbers over here, I only want the 11 to stay. I don't want this 2x to be here. Okay, so in order to get rid of it, again, it's positive, so I will subtract it to make it 0. And then you have to, again, do the same thing on the other side. And I can only subtract it from the term that has x, because the 2 had an x. So now 5 minus 2x is, 5x minus 2x is 3x. Okay. Different color here. Back to our green. And then we still have this negative 1 here, so let's just bring it down. And the only thing we have left over here is 11. But again, going back to the beginning, I only want x's on the left, numbers on the right. And right now, I have a 1 here. That's not a term with an x. So I need to get rid of it and remove it. Now, this one is negative. If I subtracted 1, it would just become negative 2. But that's not what we want. We want it to become 0. So I do the opposite of the sign. Negative 1 plus 1, that goes away. That becomes 0. And that's why in the last problem, again, this 8, I subtracted 8 because it was positive. Okay. Here, again, this 2 is positive, so I subtract it, but here the 1 is negative, so I add. I always do the opposite of whatever that sign is. Okay, and then I add 1 to the other side to balance it. So 3x, bring it down. And then 11 plus 1 is 12. And now again, you want x to be by itself, but it's not. It has a 3 next to it. It's 3 times x, so I'll divide that same 3. Whatever number's in front of the x, that's what you divide to isolate. Divide by 3. And now x equals total divided by 3, which is 4. Okay? 26. Just like before, I'm going to do this a little quicker. X is on the left, because it's already on the left. I don't want this 8 on this side. It's positive, so I subtract it from both sides. Cancels out. And now negative 8, negative 10, negative 8, they're both negative when I add them, so it would be negative 18. That one was a little faster. Okay, okay, 27. Now here, it's just 6 times y. Okay? There's only a y term on this side, and there's only numbers on this side. That's what we want. So all we have to do is the last step. Because remember, in these problems, I had to get, in order to get one term on the one side and one term on the other, I had to subtract and add, or add, like on the last problem, on the 25. But then the last step, we always divide. Divide 3 here, divide 3 here. We didn't have to divide here, but it's the same thing here. I want to get rid of this 6, so I'll divide 6. Y equals 5. Okay, another example. 7x equals 49. I want that 7 to go away. Boom, divide it. X equals 7, 49 divided by 7. Okay? Alright, so 28. Now this is when you have a fraction, or a number underneath the variable. So before it was, let's look at the problem above, it was 3 times x. Here it's our divide negative 2, not times negative 2. And we always do the opposite of whatever it is. So if it's divided by negative 2, well then I will multiply negative 2. And what happens is now this 2 I'm multiplying goes on the top, and these will cancel out. So whatever number is here below that letter, that's the one you're going to multiply by. And then I'll go to this side and multiply the same thing, again, to balance it. 2 times 2 is 20, and negative times a negative, we all know, is positive. And then r is all we have left over here, so r equals 20. And I can rewrite this with r equals 20 on the left. Okay. Now here, you see we've got parentheses. Now we always want to start simplify our equation before we start adding, subtracting from both sides. So if you see parentheses, you know you need to simplify first. Okay, so remember, if there's a number outside of a parentheses, just like on the first page, we distribute it and multiply it across. Okay, now remember on the other page I used the rectangle. I did this. We do the same thing here. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times 7 is negative 14. So now I get negative 2, sorry, not, yes, negative 2x, and then minus 14. Now the problem looks just like the other equations we just did. I want the x by itself. So in this case, we have 2 terms on this side. We want that 14 to go away. So I'll add it to both sides. Because it's negative, so I do the opposite. Bring down the 2x, or negative 2x. And now 12 plus 14 is 26. And again, it's a variable, or x, times a number. So if it's times, I do the opposite, which is divide. And here's where we got to be careful. Remember, this is a negative 2. So in order to cancel out a negative, I need to divide by a negative. Okay, so I'll do the same on both sides. Cancel out. X equals 26 divided by 2 is 13. But then a positive divided by a negative is also a negative. Okay, okay, number 30. So a lot similar to when you guys had your test. Okay, remember, first things first, in the middle here, first of all, I have parentheses. In order to get rid of them, I've got these 2 signs here in the middle that are touching, that are right next to each other. So we've got to do a leave, change. Okay, that changes the minus, that changes the plus, but remember we don't need to write it. It's just a positive number. Okay, now it's looking like the other equations we just did. Okay, we got a letter over here, or a variable here. We want to get rid of this number. So it's negative, so I'm going to add it. Okay, those cancel out, and then I'm going to add 189 here. Bring down the b, and now just add these two numbers here. 4 plus 9 is 13, carry the 1. 1 plus 3 is 4, plus 8 is 12, carry the 1. 1 plus 9 is 10, plus that is 11. And there's the number, 1,123. Okay? Now here, this is similar to a problem you guys on your test as well. The problem with this is that G is not isolated. You remember that there's always a 1 in front of all of our variables if there's nothing, but it's a negative 1. And we always want our variables to be not only isolated alone, but not negative. Okay? So same thing with x. If it was negative x, we wouldn't want that either. Okay? So in order to get rid of that negative, it's the same thing like before. This is a negative 1. So to get rid of a negative 1, I divide it by that same number. Negative 1. It goes away. And now it's just 26 divided by 1, which is 26. But then a positive divided by negative is negative. So basically what happens is the 26 becomes negative. And it balances out. Okay? Now again, when you see the parentheses, that means we need to simplify first. Okay? Now, here's where you got to be careful. Is usually when you see parentheses, you think multiply, right? Well, you're right. Because here, in front of this parentheses, there is a 1. A negative 1. So what you're actually going to do is distribute that negative 1 all the way across. So over here on the side, if I do my rectangle, it's negative 1 times x. Don't forget that 5 is negative, so it's negative 5. So negative 1 times x is just negative x. Negative 1 times negative 5 is positive 5. Okay, so I'm going to bring down the 4x. Okay, and then we have negative x, or minus x, plus, because it's positive 5, equals, and then just bring down the negative 13. Okay, now what you'll notice here is, in the problems before, we only had 1, maybe 2 terms on one side, but this time we have 3. And we want to simplify each side before we add and subtract something from it. Now what you'll notice here is that you have 2 terms that are like each other. This 4x and the negative x. So what you can do is simplify first. Well, don't forget that there's a 1 in front of that, right? So really it's 4x minus 1x, which is 3x. Okay? And then we still have the negative 13 here. And now this is starting to look like the problems we just did a minute ago. Remember we want x's on one side, numbers on the other. So we want the 3x to stay, but we want the 5 to go because it doesn't have an x. So it's positive 5, so we'll subtract it. Okay? 3x comes down, negative 13 minus 5. Again, I'll use my adding subtracting box. And they'll be in the same box, so I'll add them. 13 plus 5 is 18. And they're both negative, so they'll stay negative. And here, again, x is not isolated yet, so we'll have to divide 3 on both sides. Okay, 18 divided by 3 is 6. Negative divided by positive is a negative 6. X equals negative 6. Okay. So now, here the same principle applies. I know this looks like a complicated problem because you have this fraction here, but really it's the same thing. Okay, we still want x on this side, and we still want numbers on this side. So looking at these 2 numbers, because remember this is 2 numbers, you have a 9 here, and then a 1/3 x here. If you want x on this side, which number doesn't belong? Well, it's the 9. Okay. And the 9 is positive, So we subtract it. Get rid of it. And now you still have negative 1 over 3x. Okay? And then we have two negatives. So remember, like before with our box, they're both the same sign. We'd add them. So it'd be 14 is still negative. Now, you have a fraction. Okay? So this is 1 over 3, or 1 divided by 3. So what you're going to do, you're going to multiply here when you have a fraction. And if you multiply that same fraction upside down, which we call the reciprocal, it's going to cancel it out. But remember, this is also negative. We want the negative to cancel out, so we'll also make this negative. So basically what you do is if you see a fraction, you flip it upside down, and that's what you multiply by. Okay? And if it's negative, also multiply negative. What happens is the 3's cancel out, because you have 1 on top, 1 on bottom, and your 1's cancel out, because you have 1 on top and 1 on bottom. And then the negatives, negative times negative, will give you a positive. If you look at this over here, remember we're multiplying fractions, we always multiply across. 3 times 1 is 3. 1 times 3 is 3. And the negative times the negative, that already canceled out. So 3 over 3 is just 1. And it's just like the other problems. We wanted to just be 1. But again, we want to do the same thing over here. On the other side. Okay. Now we have a whole number times a fraction. Okay. What you do is put this over 1, and then again multiply across. 14 times 3, 42. And negative times a negative is a positive, so that negative will cancel out. 1 times 1 is just 1. But as most of you know, 42 over 1, or any number over 1, is just the same number. So x equals 42. Okay. Now here's another one, where it's a variable times a number. And you already have x's on one side, you already have numbers on the other. So the last step is always divide, or taxing. Okay? And remember, if that number is negative, the one next to the letter, you also need to divide negative. So now w equals 27 divided by 3 is 9. And then let's do our triangle. And you notice I'm not doing the triangle every time, I just do it sometimes just to remind you. Positive 27, negative 3, so we know this is negative. Okay? 35. Ooh. Okay, now we got multiple things going on here. Okay, let's start on the left side. Now remember, again, in the end, we want x over here, numbers over here. Alright? Now before we add and subtract anything on each side, let's simplify each side if we can. Okay, over here, I notice that I've got an x term here and an x term here, so I can combine those two before I do anything. And I want to, and when I need to. Okay, so if you see 3 numbers on one side, and any of them are like terms, combine them first. Okay, so this negative 4x and negative x, remember that there's a 1 there, so this is basically, I'm adding a 4 and a 1, they're both negative in the same box, so it's going to be 5x, but it's negative, because they're both negative, plus 11. Okay, now over here on this side, it's a number in front of parentheses, so you know you're going to multiply or distribute. So I'll set up a rectangle, and we do 2 times 6 times x, then negative times a positive is a negative, negative times a negative is positive, 2 times 5 is 10. So now what we have over here is negative 6x plus 10. Okay? Now we can start balancing out our equation. Remember again, we want x's over here and numbers over here. Okay. So which term doesn't belong? The 11 does not belong because it's not an x term. And we subtract it because the original 11 was positive, so I'll subtract it from this 10. That cancels out. Just go ahead and bring down the negative 5x. And then bring down the negative 6x. And then positive 10 minus 10. Minus 11. Well, again, these are different signs, so we subtract the bigger from the smaller. Sorry, the smaller from the bigger. So 11 minus 10 is 1, but then 11 is bigger, so it's going to be negative 1. Okay, now we Just started on the left side and got rid of 11, so let's go over to the right side now. What term doesn't belong? Well, we want numbers on the right, so the 6x does not belong. And it's negative 6x, so we're going to add 6x. Add it to both sides. That cancels out. Again, if I pull up my box here, which I could have done in the last one when I did 10 and 11, 6x is here, 5x is here, different box, so subtract. Bigger minus smaller, 6 minus 5 is 1, and the 6 is bigger, so it's positive. So now we have negative 1 over here. But again, we don't need this 1 here, so I can just write x, and there's my answer. Okay? So we had to do a couple things here. We had to simplify each side. First, I combined like terms on the left. I multiplied or distributed on the right. Then the next one, we isolate the variable first by getting rid of the terms that don't belong on each side. Subtract 11 here, then added 6x over here, and then we got our answer. Okay, 2 more. Okay, now this one, again, x terms on the left, numbers on the right. Which one does not belong? Well, this 8 does not belong. The x does, the 8 doesn't. So I'm going to subtract 8, subtract 8, bring down not just x, but remember there's a negative here, so it's negative x. Okay, equals, bring out my box. Okay, this 12 is negative, the 8 is negative. Both in the same box, we add, the negative 1 will win. Now again, we're not done because we have a negative in front of the x. But remember, like I said before, there's always a number in front of x no matter what. If there's nothing, there's a 1. So to get rid of this negative 1, divide by negative 1. Cancels out. And then if you already guessed, negative divided by negative is positive. 20 divided by 1 is just 20. Okay. Last problem. Balance it out. X over here, numbers over here. Okay. Start on the left side. 23 doesn't belong. Subtract 23. Subtract 23. Cancels out. 4x bring it down. And then 2x bring it down. And then both the same sign, so we'll add them. 17 plus 23 is 30. And they're both negative, so it stays negative. And now I'll go to the right side. 2x doesn't belong, so subtract it because it's positive. And now 4x minus 2x is 2x. And then we still have negative 30 over here. Thing is, 2 times x, so I'll do the opposite of times, or multiply, and divide the 2. Okay. And now x is equal to, let's see, we have a division going on there. So let's pull up the triangle. 30 is negative, 2 is positive, so that means my number is going to be negative. 30 divided by 2 is 15, so it's negative 15. Okay? Okay, that's it for your review. If you have any more questions, you can go to Google Classroom and sign up for a Remind and send me a question. Alright, talk to you later.